1730 hours on April 4th, 2004, Sadr city of Baghdad, Iraq.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
1st Platoon, Charlie 25 Cav, was escorting a sewage truck in the southern part of the city.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
1755 hours as the sun began to set.
Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah.
3 large groups of men scattered to the north as the patrol approached.
Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah.
Everyone in the patrol began to scan their sectors.
أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله.
The city of over 2 million people grew eerily quiet. And then,
أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله.
what started as sporadic gunfire quickly became overwhelming from all directions. Enemy forces across the city called to arms by the echoing calls of prayer, bouncing from one minaret to the next.
على الصلاة.
This sparked a chain reaction that threw the 1st Brigade Combat Team, 1st Cav Division, headlong into the battle we now call Black Sunday. I am your host, Eddie Lazzari, and on this series of episodes, I will be talking to the troops who were there and their families. We will be following and discussing The Long Road Home, a 7-part miniseries in the National Geographic Channel. If you or someone you know served during the Battle of Sadr City, I want to talk to you. Join us over to our closed Facebook group 04-04-04. Now let's meet our next guest. Hello folks, I am on with Duane France. This is the conclusion or wrap-up episode of the 444 series that is the companion podcast series to the National Geographic series, The Long Road Home, written by, it was based off of a book written by Martha Raddatz, an incredible woman that's just done some amazing things, war correspondent. She was on the ground there with us back in, in April time frame and made subsequent visits back to Iraq after that. And, she came to really connect with the soldiers of the 1st Brigade Combat Team, 1st Cav Division, in particular the soldiers of 25 Cav, as a result of what went down on April 4th, 2004 and in the months after that. And so, and I'm bringing Duane on because this is actually Duane's idea. He approached me and said, I think it would be a really good idea if I were to come on and maybe interview you and kind of talk about, the project and how it came to be, why it came to be, and kind of what kind of came out of it. And so even though I'm hosting the show, I'm actually going to turn this over to Duane, and he's going to lead the discussion from here forward. And he's got some questions he wants to ask me, and I'm just going to be as open and as candid with Duane and you guys listening to his questions, because if one thing I've learned throughout this project, it's the power of vulnerability and the willingness and courage to share a story. So with that, welcome to the show, Duane.
Well, thanks, Eddie. I appreciate that. Yeah, folks, Again, as Eddie said, my name's Duane France. Eddie and Bennett have brought me on as one of the co-hosts of one of the other shows, Headspace and Timing. If you haven't checked that out, so a little bit about me. I'm a retired Army NCO combat vet, one Iraq, two Afghanistans, a little bit of Bosnia way back in the last century. And also now a clinical mental health counselor. And as I was listening to these episodes, I was listening to it as with the ear of both a combat veteran who operated in or near the area that Eddie did, and the guys on 444, but also as a clinical mental health counselor. And I heard some really impactful things throughout this 12 or 13 series episode so far. So wanted to come on and talk to Eddie about, in true therapist fashion, how do you feel about that? So, but really, that's what it is. So, yeah, Eddie, there you go. You're done with that part of it, at least with the series. That might have been pretty heavy for you.
Yeah, and I think, I'm really glad that you're on to kind of really kick this around a little bit, because this actually started, before the series released. It started with some conversations that you and I had, and Bennett and I, we have a secret podcast. It's called the Daily Dose with Bennett and Eddie, secret podcast, and it's just a short, really 10 minutes or less episodes that we do, and we record with our phone in our car, and no editing. It's not a highly produced show. It's just literally what's on our mind that day. And I ended up doing a Daily Dose episode about the topic of reading war books and war movies and watching war movies as a way. I think we called it, almost like a penance, right, for whatever thoughts and feelings and issues that I have and harbor. I just feel the need to kind of inflict that emotional pain on myself as a form of punishment, right? And you and I kind of really started to talk about that, and that was a great conversation that you and I had, and really opened up, I think, for the first time to anybody of a professional caliber over the phone, and you started to ask some questions that have never been asked of me before, and it really got me thinking about how I really feel about stuff, and being able to find the words to express some of the things I've been feeling, which I thought was extremely eye-opening and very encouraging, right? That the things that I feel aren't new. I'm not inventing these feelings. They, in fact, they're quite common amongst a lot of veterans that have gone through what we've gone through, and so it was a nice feeling. And then we caught wind that the series, of course, everybody on the network knew of my time in Iraq, and I actually did some very early episodes about this with Jay Fondren. Episode 40, Battle of Sadr City, 444 with Jay Fondren, and then a follow-on episode, episode 42, Finding Your Worth and a New Purpose Once You're Out with Jay Fondren. So those are actually done really early on in 2016. And so, it was kind of my first stab at really kind of trying to talk about the experience there. And then we caught wind, or, we hear about this series on National Geographic coming out, and I was, if I'm being honest, I was scared to death, bro. I mean, I was scared when I heard this was coming out, because there was nothing I could do personally to stop it. Not that I necessarily wanted it to, but I wasn't sure I was ready for it, and I was scared about that. I was scared about feeling scared about it. I don't know, that's kind of strange, but I was really nervous about the release, and I didn't know what it was going to do and the emotions it was going to bring back, and I thought to myself, there's nothing I can do to stop this from releasing. And I know myself, and I know that this is going to be something that I'm going to watch, whether I want to or not. And so I thought, you know what? If this is going to come out and I can't do anything about it, I might as well stand and face it. It's very similar to, you hear you hear experts say, if you're walking through the woods and you're confronted by a bear, the worst thing you can do is turn and run from it. That flight activity, that flight behavior triggers the hunter and the bear, and obviously, no matter how big the bear is, they can outrun you, and it could just really end really poorly for you. So the recommendation is, if you come face to face with the bear in the woods, you're startled, it's unexpected. The best thing to do is just stand squarely, as tall as you can, make yourself as big as you can, and just face it, and don't turn your back. And that is just a scary proposition to even think about what that might feel like. And that's kind of what I felt like. And I said, you know what? I'm going to turn. I'm going to face this bear. I'm going to puff up my chest. I'm going to look as big as I can, and I'm just going to stare this damn thing down in hopes it doesn't eat me alive. And I said, but if I'm going to do this, I don't want to do it alone. And that's when I decided to create the 444 Facebook group. And I just started to invite guys that I knew, people that I served with. And then call to action was, invite others that that served during that time. And not only let's come together on this group, but let's share our stories. Come on, a podcast episode with me, share your story. And to be honest with you, Duane, when I first thought of this kind of idea in terms of interviewing guys that were there, I didn't really expect it to get as deep as it got. I expected to just kind of have some people on, tell some war stories, maybe share a little bit about that day on 444, and just kind of release a couple series or a couple shows in the series. And we'll get into kind of how that started and how it kind of grew. But, looking back now on the shows that we've done so far, pretty deep stuff we ended up covering, man, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and you bring up a couple of really good points. One of them, though, maybe revealing a little bit of Eddie's character. If I'm going to stand in front of this bear, I'm going to bring some other people to stand in front of this bear so that if I do decide to run, I'm going to trip and the bear's going to get them.
Yes.
And I'm going to push them in the way of the bear so that I don't get mauled. So it's pretty devious of you, brother.
Yeah, man. That's the way I roll.
But going back to the first couple episodes with Jay Fondren, and that's and as I was going back and I was looking, and you had actually tentatively addressed this in the very beginning, and is as this evidence, and as you know, for us, for veterans, anniversaries matter. Memorial Day isn't, of course, just on Memorial Day, and so each of us have different times throughout the year. And for many veterans I've seen, it's usually spring or fall, because in the conflicts where we were at, those were the fighting seasons. Some summer, but it's usually April, May, or October, November kind of time frame for a lot of veterans. And so looking back on when you released the thing with the couple episodes with Jay, that was around April 4th, 2016. Were you as apprehensive addressing that around the anniversary in 2016, kind of starting that off?
Yeah, this was it was a hard show. This was the reason why I broke it up into two shows, is because I actually got Jay on, and our conversation was just incredible, and it was longer than one show, so I ended up breaking it up into two shows, but it was actually one conversation. And getting back a little bit to some of the topics that you covered during the Veteran Mental Health Boot Camp series that you released at the end of December, one of the episodes in there, you talk about this concept of moral injury. And moral injury was something that was very, very new. Bennett and I ended up talking about it in one of our early shows. It was very new. I think it was an article that Bennett had written or had read and shared it with me. And up until then, all I've ever really heard of to explain away some of these feelings is this thing called PTSD. And I the thing about PTSD is there's some things about it that I relate to. I think some of the technical term is exaggerated startle response or something like that. I still suffer from that. It's gotten better over the years, but that's still something I deal with. I feel a little bit, elevated heart rate and a little nervous in really, really large crowds. Again, that could be something, not PTSD, but maybe PTS, more of a kind of just an after effect. But there's a much bigger things going on in my psyche, I think, that PTS just couldn't and didn't explain. And it wasn't until I heard and read up and became more educated about this concept of moral injury, and that really started to make more sense to me. And I realized that one of the biggest things that I had dealt with, that I continue to deal with, is what happened with Jay Fondren. Jay was a close friend of mine. We were both in the same forward observer platoon, but our platoon ended up getting split. Couple of teams went to first platoon of the recon troop. A couple teams went to second platoon, and a couple, my section went to the headquarters. So we kind of split our platoon up, and we were commingled with Cav Scouts, basically. So you'd roll out the fob, and you got a mix of cavalry scouts and forward observers, right? And but Jay was one of the guys that I served with for a number of years before we deployed. I saw this guy come up through the ranks from PFC all the way to staff sergeant. And I was the senior squad leader in charge of 3 teams, and he was my counterpart, second squad leader in charge of 3 teams. And we grew really close. And even though he was junior to me, I saw him as an equal. And I was coming back off of patrol one day, and I received a frago on my way back in that, my lieutenant was a college graduate of Texas A&M, and there was a major that was working in the Brigade Talk that was also an alum of Texas A&M, and he had received a Texas A&M flag in the mail from one of his family members, and he wanted to get a photo op with some Iraqi, families. It was a brigade support guy, so he never really left the fob. So we agreed to kind of escort him out. The fob there was a family on North Pluto that lived underneath the bridge, and we became really close with that family and kind of took care of them a little bit. And so the plan was to take some food and some clothing or whatever out to this family and get a photo op. And so that was my mission, was to swing by the front gate, not come all the way in, because if you come all the way in, you got to clear weapons and all that. So just basically stop by the front gate and wait for my platoon leader to exit the gate in his truck with this major. And so that was what we were going to do. And right at the last minute, I got a follow-on frago from Cowboy Mike, the BRT CP, and they said, disregard Rogue One, you guys can come in. Sergeant Fondren's section is coming out of the fob, and they're going to take over that duty, that responsibility. And I said, roger that. And so my section came into the fob. Fondren's section left and took the lieutenant and major up to the family and did their photo op. And that was all they were going to do the photo op and come back and, drop the major back off. And they were on their way back, and Jay's truck was hit by an IED. It was one of those, those EFP, the copper-plated.
The devil's tool.
The devil's tool, man, and it ripped through his door. It blew both of his legs off above the knee, filleted both of his arms really bad. It was horrific. The entire floorboard dropped out of his truck. The batteries underneath the TC seat were gone, and the driver suffered a lot of shrapnel wounds to his face and his arms. But after they X-rayed it, they didn't really find any metal. It was all bone shards from Jay's legs that ended up penetrating the driver's face and hands, and it was horrible. My section was immediately tasked to go back out, kind of secure the route, and I got a call from my platoon leader or my platoon sergeant, and he gave me the explicit instructions to try to find his legs, because we didn't want the enemy to get to get them and use them for any type of propaganda. And that was my mission. And not only that, we didn't want like some wild dogs to be gnawing on Jay's legs either. And I went out there, and it, other than a huge pool of blood all over the road, like we couldn't find anything. It was nothing to be found. Jay obviously was evac'd back to the green zone. Some amazing things happened with the guys that treated him, threw the tourniquets on his legs and threw him on the hood of his Humvee and drove him back to Fob Iron Horse. And we got him CAS-evac'd. He ended up in Germany. They put him in a chemically induced coma for over 30 days. Ended up in Walter Reed. He survived some wounds that in earlier conflicts would have been unsurvivable, and Jay, is doing very well for himself. He's got out of the military, obviously medically discharged, 100% disability, and ended up having 4 more kids after that. He's got 6 beautiful children. He lives in Texas, and he struggles every day, but man, he's an inspiration. He meets with veterans on a regular basis and talks to them, and he's very he's a religious, spiritual man, and I love him to death. And but knowing that, and again, this is just the things that we think about, right? We play these what if games, and I struggled a lot with that, because in a lot of ways I felt like that he took my ID for me. That one had your name on it. It was where you would have been in the patrol, in the truck that he was in, because he was your counterpart, on that patrol. And it was, and there's a couple different layers where this comes into moral injury. You weren't out there aggressing an objective, or he wasn't out there. The mission was not to do something, Medal of Honor worthy. It was simply to get a picture with a piece of cloth. It was just a throwaway thing. And so there's a sense of, why were we wasting our time? There's all of these meaning things that we have behind it, that we put on that. The other piece about that story, Eddie, is, and this is as much for those who have never served, who may be listening to this podcast, where in anyone's non-military life would you hear the words, make sure you get his legs? Right. Yeah. That's something that's different for us, different for veterans. And that's something that's really hard. People might have the concept of war as hell, but having someone that you have respect for, someone that you work for, come in and put their hand on your soldier and look you in the eye and say, make sure you get his legs. That's not something that happens in normal everyday life. And I don't think that, many who have never served even want to know that, or want to hear that that's part of what happens. And 2, that it's inconceivable to them. And so these, all of this is ricocheting in your head as you're going through. And this is in 2016. It had been 12 years at that point. And then you reach out to Jay to interview him for the podcast. Did you anticipate that was going to be a hard conversation? How long did it take you to lead up to that? Oh, man. Like I said, it was episode 40 and 42. So it took me a while. It was... I reached out to all my guys. I had my driver on. I had my gunner on. I've had my platoon sergeant on. I've had many folks that I serve with, have their own show or own episode. This was one that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to share Jay's story, because, and to see what he's done with his life post-military, and the support that he has from his family and his church. And I don't know if that had been, my IED, I don't know if I would have been as resilient as Jay has been. And that's just a testament to the kind of guy he is. And I just, I have a lot of respect for him, and I knew it was going to be a tough conversation. And if you listen to those shows, it is an emotional episode. It was tough. It was right around Thanksgiving when this happened. Like you said, it was. We were talking about the Battle of Sadr City, but his IED happened around in the November timeframe, and it was right around Thanksgiving. It was before Thanksgiving, and of course they have this big, well they do the best they can. The military guys in the DFAC, they'll put out a nice spread and do what they can with Thanksgiving meal and decorations and everything. And I just remember going to the dining facility with a couple of guys, and we didn't know if Jay was going to make it. He had been evac to Germany at this point. He was in a coma, and he was mortally wounded. I mean, he was not doing well, and they didn't know if he was going to make it. They didn't expect him to. They basically told us, don't hold your breath. He's probably not going to make it. And we went, a few guys went to the dining facility, and I couldn't help but set a place for Jay at the table. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard thing to do, and you got to carry on. You got to. I'm a squad leader, right? And I've got to be strong for my guys, and I got to keep their head in the game. And your best friend's life's on the line, and you don't know what's going to happen. And all you can think about. I mean, I used to babysat his kids, so him and his wife can go out on date night. He and I's relationship. He and I, we spent so much time at my house on the weekend putting together packing slips for the loadout, and we were a team, and that was hard, man.
And this is where the psychological impact and the emotional impact of our service, here it is 15 years later or however long it's been, and it is impactful. And this is the way that you and I are going to see the world forever and ever till the end of our lives, right? We're, prayerfully going to be veterans much longer than we were soldiers, but that period of time in our life has a huge impact. And as you said before, this isn't something that PTSD doesn't explain the grief that you have. It's the way that you explain what's right and wrong with the world. And so even with all of that emotional pain, you sort of stepped out a little bit and had the conversation with Jay, and even put it out there on the podcast. And so it was easing in a little bit into talking about this very pivotal, very emotional part of your life. And so I get the impression that I don't know if you could have done the 444 series had you not stepped out and had those first couple conversations with Jay.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. Yeah, I think so.
So then as you approached, as you said, you see the series. I think you had said you had read the books, and of course there are some other books that are written about this area. And I don't know that. I think you and I might have talked about it, but I served in the same area a couple of years later. So 2006 to 2007, during the surge, 15 months. You called it Cuervo. By the time I got there, they had reverted it back to Rustamaya. You called it what is the main base there?
Iron Horse.
Predators and Pluto.
Yep.
For us, it was Fob Loyalty. So Fob Loyalty was the one that was at the corner of Predators and Pluto. And when we were there, we didn't go into Sadr City. We were actually part of the concretization of Baghdad, in which we put up the T-walls and T-barriers and tried to separate a lot of the sectarian violence. But in 2004, 2005, we actually didn't incur into, not in a significant way, into Sadr City until the second Battle of Sadr City happened in April of '08. And so that was almost like a bookend. So it was really sort of not off limits, but it wasn't as heavily patrolled as you guys did or as the crew behind us. So even as I'm listening to that, I'm getting not flashbacks, but I'm seeing where we were and the patrols we did, and going back and forth, Predator, Pluto's, Brewers, all those places. And you're right, the freaking EFPs, it is the devil's tool. So as you're going into this series and starting to put together 444 and seeing what, you weren't involved with the production in any way because you were part of the Brigade Reconnaissance Troop, and this was very much focused on the kind of the platoon that was there. But what did you hope to what did you expect? What did you hope to get out of this podcast series from the beginning? So thinking back when you first came up with it, what did you kind of hope to do?
Yeah, so in my mind, when I first started this is kind of it's gonna be funny to say this, but for those of you that are fans of Walking Dead, I don't know if you are, Duane. Do you watch Walking Dead?
I do.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's one of those guilty pleasures that. Why are they so? I mean, it like a freaking a platoon of Cav Scouts could have ended this. I mean, why? They're so freaking untactical and just they need. Well, they had a therapist and then they killed her off. I don't know. It just freaking it was. But yes, I watch it.
So they got the Walking Dead, and then immediately following is called The Talking Dead, right?
Right.
Where they kind of they bring on some of the characters from that episode. And they kind of talk about, the episode and then maybe some behind the scenes stuff. And it's really kind of insightful, and it's not very heavy, obviously. And in my mind, I thought that's kind of what I wanted to try to do. I wanted to kind of release these episodes in conjunction with the release of The Long Road Home on National Geographic. And yes, I wanted to interview some of the actors, and I actually did interview Joey, who plays, what was the name of the specialist, Raydell, and but he's the only actor that I ended up interviewing. But I wanted to kind of interview the guys that were there and just kind of talk about the show, and then what was accurate, what wasn't. Did it bring back any memories? Tell us a story, kind of thing.
So you wanted to go show by show and breaking down the show like we just got done with, episode 1. Kind of what did you think? A little bit what Jeff's planning on doing, going show by show, specifically on Band of Brothers. So that's what you anticipated was talking specific. We just got finished watching this episode. What did you think? Yeah,
that was kind of my thought going into it at the very beginning, and it so didn't happen that way.
No, it did not happen. And of course, as I was sort of watching this develop, you had a little bit of a hard time in the very beginning getting guys on or getting people on to interview, right?
Yeah, it did. I created a group, and the group actually started to grow much quicker than I had thought, and it's a closed group because I didn't want just anybody in there. And there's a lot of haters out there around the series, and there's a lot of hate from the guys that we relieved. There's a lot of them that believe that we kind of went in there and stirred the pot, and we kind of brought this on ourselves. And for whatever reason, there's a lot of animosity and kind of disdain amongst a lot of the guys that we relieved for whatever reason. Not everybody, but there's definitely some really strong haters there. And so I made it a closed group, and I even put a few questions on there to that you have to answer before you come in the group to try to vet out the guys that were coming in. Right? It was open to anybody that served in that time and their families. And of course, there's no way for me to really truly vet that out 100%, but I just did the best I could to make sure that I protected the integrity of the group and kind of, you know what I mean? Because I wanted it to be an open, free space for people to communicate. And that was really where the call to action was. Hey, come, you know, I did a little Facebook Live. I pinned it to the top of the page. You know, I really, you know, here's my Calendly link. We can schedule some time with me. Let's do this. And there was a lot of people.
Crickets.
Well, there was a lot of people who were like, yeah, man, that's cool. Yeah, I'll do it. I'm like, here's the link. Nothing. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, okay, like, you know, you could tell me you want to do it, but put your money where your mouth is. Like, let's do this, you know? And so I kind of got a little nervous that, man, this isn't really going to happen. And then Sal Zuniga, who was second platoon leader when we first got there. So him and Jay actually worked very closely together. He's still serving, which was, you know, a surprise. A lot of people that are currently serving shy away from doing anything like a podcast or an interview or a blog post or anything because for whatever reason they think they're, I don't know, protecting something. I don't know. But so Zuniga, he's kind of a conventional out of the box thinker anyway, and really cool guy. And he's like, yeah, man, I'll come on. And so we scheduled the interview, and this was the first. And obviously, everybody kind of connects on social media and touches base with each other once in a while. But talking to him on the phone or on Skype to do the recording that night was the first time I actually spoke to him since we redeployed back in 2005. And just hearing his voice and talking to him was just amazing all by itself. And it was kind of funny because we talked, you know, he was on Fort Hood and got to visit the set. When it was not in production. So you got to kind of walk around and, you know, go and look at, you know, the police station that he spent a lot of time in Baghdad, and it was a scaled down version of it, but it was very accurate and brought back. So he talks about how that kind of brought back some memories, and he walked through that set with his brother, and his brother served during that time too. And so it was just an amazing episode. But what it did was, though, is by him, through his actions coming on the show, and this is really the first episode of the series. Now, of course, we got the Jay Fonran episodes that I kind of tagged on part of this group, but from a BLK or a Black Sunday 444 series episode, he was the first one. And he came on, and once he came on and I released his show and everybody got to hear it, all of a sudden it was like turning on of a switch. Everybody started to schedule interviews. And it was amazing because through his actions, he was saying, he was granting permission. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
No, I do. Yeah, no, it does. And that's exactly what I think that I saw as this was going. And this is what we see when it comes to talking about these really heavy issues in mental health. David Smith on his on the second I think episode of the Veteran Mental Health Boot Camp talks explicitly about that, about veterans need permission from someone that they trust to say, hey, it's okay for you to do this. You know, it's sort of, you know, we didn't need, you know, it's sort of follow the leader, but you know, doing parachute landing falls off of the second story ledge. You know, who's the first one going to do it? But as soon as somebody does it, yeah, I'm going to, you know, we literally do jump off of bridges after our brothers. It kind of happens. right. Yeah. Just sorry, Mom. It's just the way it goes. But then it's until someone says, yes, A, I'm experiencing this. B, I'm going to talk about it in an open and vulnerable way. Then it starts that snowball effect. And so it was pretty cool for me to see you experience that. And it was a week later that you released the episode of Chris Padilla, but you hadn't recorded any other episodes up to that point. Major Zuniga was the only one that you had in the can, and you weren't sure where you were going to go from that until everybody started pinging you.
Yeah, so I released episode 1, and I was kind of worried. I'm like, I'm doing this limited series, and it's going to have one show.
Very limited.
Very limited. But it's amazing because, you're an NCO, I was an NCO, so we pride ourselves, as NCOs, we pride ourselves in leading the way. And we kind of make a lot of light and fun of, officers and, good officers, bad officers, whatever, but it was amazing that it was an officer that actually led the way and opened the door for everyone else to say, it's okay, come on in and let's do this. And like you said, I started to get all these interviews, and I just, it was amazing. And Chris Padilla, I served, he is a forward observer that was attached to 225, and I served with him. So it was an easier conversation because we were both FOs, we were both part of 1st Battalion 82nd Field Artillery that was attached out to our maneuver. Basically, I was attached to the BRT. He was attached to 25. And then, episode 3 and 4, we followed it up with a couple of other guys that I served with, Lorenzo Nathan and Justin Hardy. But then, it opened it up to people I've never even spoke to before that was there, but I didn't know them personally. I've never talked to them before. And I didn't know kind of what direction those conversations were going to take. And it was amazing because I was able to talk to those guys as just like we had served together for 5 years, just like, you know what I mean? It was so easy to talk to those guys too. I don't know why I was surprised by that, because I've done it in the past, but I just kind of was a little surprised by that.
Well, and that's something, again, unique to the veteran culture. I recall as a kid, my and I think that those may who've listened to my series or my show. So my father was a Vietnam veteran, and then 3 of his brothers, 2 brothers and then 1 brother-in-law, had served in Vietnam. And I remember as a teenager going over to my aunt's house and seeing my uncle sitting on the porch with this little short, old ponytail hair guy, and they're just, laughing and laughing. And I'm like, I who's that guy? We had a very close family. And I said, we've never seen him before. And one of my cousins, or maybe my aunt, had said, yeah, that's one of his Vietnam buddies. And I was like, how long, we've never seen him before. They said, no, they haven't talked in 10 years, but yet they sat there on the porch, and it was like it never, not a day had passed. And then I even personally had that experience with one of the guys that I had on the earlier show, one of my section sergeants when I was a platoon sergeant, Brian Alexander. And a couple years ago, I think now, I had gone out to D.C. and his wife were friends, and me and him, of course. And so we ran out, and literally that's what we did. We hadn't spoken each other face to face in probably 5 or 6 years, but then we were back on the porch, and like had never, a minute had never passed. And so as you start to engage with other veterans that you served with, it's, it's cliche. It's, not a moment has passed and you pick up the phone, but also you have shared experience that people that you had never served with, you have much more in common, and you have an instant bond. I've seen it with other nation service members. I've talked with some Canadian veterans, and they say they feel like they have more in common with U.S. veterans that they served with than their neighbors. And same for us, right? And British veterans, and so some of the coalition partners that we served along, just being in the military and having that culture is an instant connection. And that led to some of the easier conversations that you had with Jack Barron and Vanny and Hardy and guys like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you said that, you were kind of surprised with how deep it went. And this is, again, something that you had talked to me about before. And one of the things that I enjoy about, what you and Bennett did, you guys are talking about veteran mental health, and you're not mental health professionals, but even Chris Padilla, I recall in his episode, he's talking about the struggles that he had, the family, he'd gotten a divorce, and some of the challenges he had related to mental health concerns. what surprised you most about where the conversations went, and maybe what common threads did you hear again through most of them?
Yeah, this particular series is way different than a lot of the other shows that I've done. Obviously, we've got over 300 episodes on the network combined, right? And everyone kind of has like the niche. Like you talk about veteran mental health, and Jeff talks a lot about military history, and Attack Friday we talk about actionable tips, tricks, and coachable knowledge, and so with all these other shows, there's kind of already like an agenda or a topic or a line of questioning that you're kind of like on Change Your POV we interview entrepreneurs and other veterans doing some amazing things, and so there's almost like these canned questions that you kind of are asking, and you have an idea, you're trying to solicit a particular response that will add value to the show and to your listeners. With this particular show, there was, other than the fact that the only thing that we all had in common was this 444, there was really no line of questioning, and the sky was the limit. And I just said going into this that we were going to talk about wherever the conversation led, that's where we were going to go. If it ended up turning into a no shit, there I was, kind of a funny, war story, great. If it turned into, something that, how their life changed post-military, then fine. I didn't want to try to force a square peg through a round hole or try to direct the conversation towards one direction or another. Obviously, as the host, it's my job to keep the conversation flowing. And, in guests that come on the show, they're not podcast experts, and many of them have never been interviewed before. Many of them that I talk to have never even listened to a podcast episode before in their life. And so it's my job to just keep the conversation going for about 60 minutes. But whatever we talked about and whatever direction that went was very unique with everyone. And to your point, Duane, I think the common theme is, with every one of these shows, every one of these guests, there's a moment where they opened up that little tiny lid of vulnerability and shared a little bit. Some opened that lid a little bit more and shared a little bit more. Some just cracked it open just a little bit and let a little bit of the light out, and then closed it really quick. But at every single show, you'll hear a moment of vulnerability. And it's funny because after the show, at the end when we're done recording, almost all of them said, wow, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to let my emotions get the better of me. And I think that was one of the things. It's like, no, man, it's okay. It's almost like people get to that emotional point and then they feel they need to apologize for it. I'm sorry, that brought out some emotions in me. Like, why do we feel the need to apologize? And I don't know. I've been guilty of it myself, but that's one of the common themes that I found. If we ever, once we got to that point where we were uncovering a little emotion and being a little vulnerable, everyone felt the need to apologize. And that was the first thing. The second thing was, everyone, for the most part, came back afterwards, whether it be a direct message or right there on the group, and said, thank you for giving me an opportunity and a platform to talk about this, because many of them kind of packed it away for 13 years and never really talked about it in a long, long time.
And I think it's important to at least put it out there, and you talk about cracking the lid, but I kind of explain to some veterans that I work with, it's like you're coming out of the shadows and you sort of set this one little thing out in the light, then you retreat back in the shadows and you want to see how people are going to respond. You're not thinking that, cognitively, but that's sort of how it happens. Like, oh, I'm going to show you this one little thing that I'm afraid that you're going to, whatever, think that I'm a nut job, or you think that, or you're going to laugh at me, or whatever it is that's keeping me from opening up. So I'm just going to show you this one little piece, see how you deal with it, and then I'm going to retreat back and just kind of observe. It's like probing the wire, right? It's like you're not going to go full fledged into it. And that's really what you did with this series when you started off with the 2 episodes with Jay Fonda, and you put it out there, even if that's not consciously what you were trying to do. You put it out there in a limited way, and then kind of pulled back and then decided, like I said before, you might not have been able to get what you got out of this series had you not done that first cracking of the lid, right?
Yeah.
And so even to that benefit of, hey, I just talked about this really heavy emotional thing and the ceiling didn't come crashing down on me. The lightning didn't strike me, the life continued on, and it actually helps me feel a little bit better. But it takes that first little bit of moment of vulnerability to kind of reach out and show that piece. And again, that goes back to the permission piece is once veterans start to see, hey, he showed his piece a little bit and nothing bad happened to him. Maybe I can give my piece and kind of move forward and do that. So I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, it's one of those things where, you don't, it's like a train, right? When a train's coming down the track, you may see it, but you don't really hear it. And if you're not paying attention, you may not even know it's coming. But man, once it finally goes by you, you can feel the earth shake under your feet, and you can hear the loud rumbling. Like there's no question that there's a train there, and that's kind of the way the series was. It was that's kind of the revelation that we had going into these shows, and every show that we did, the more interviews that we had, I think it gave everyone a chance to listen to the previous shows, and it just continued to build on the permission, to build on the it's okay to talk about this, to build on the, even people that I didn't interview that are in the group that listen to the show, reach out to me and say, wow, man, just listening to some of these interviews has given me the courage to talk to some of my buddies about this that I haven't talked about this in a long, long time. So even though we've only got X number of guests on this particular interview, it's had far-reaching effects to those that I didn't interview, and I think that's really kind of the point, right? It's making it so we are okay. We are doing this together. Everybody felt like like somebody says, I feel like we're getting the band back together, right? Getting everybody that we've gone our separate ways. Some are still in. Most have gotten out. Got on with their lives. Remarried, got divorced, remarried some more, had some more kids. Like life is just continuing on, right? This gives us an opportunity though to kind of to stop, look back, and reflect on that time that we all had together, and share. And it's been healing for me, and I know very healing for those that have been part of it.
Yeah, and it is one of those things where you sort of forget, the bond that you had. But things when I had that show with Stan Lake and Daniel Charles, and Daniel says, man, you're just a little bit uglier than I remember you, but you're still my brother, right?
Yeah.
It's that, just a little bit more stupid, it's but don't kick my dog. Only I'm the one that can kick my dog, kind of thing. But it is, and then as you said, sort of somebody says, well, if it's okay for him to kind of do this, and then it's okay for me, and then you had the one episode, so number 6, and you had mentioned it at your capstone. This was one of your top 2017 episodes. The episode with Sylvia. Talking about her sons, I get the sense that episode, or when she reached out to you to talk about that was a big shock for you.
Yeah, obviously Sylvia, her son is Robert, played in the show. He was killed on April 4th, 2004, and I knew about that. And she reached out to me, and she's been in, she was in the group. She was really active on Twitter and commenting on everything that National Geographic was putting out. She was there for the premiere. She was a big part of like the production, and so Sylvia's kind of a staple in this whole project on this whole everything, this event. And so she reached out to me, and I was like, oh wow, this is going to be neat to get get some family members in on this conversation too. But when she first reached out to me, she goes, I would really like to share a story and talk to you, but it's not Robert's story that I want to talk about. It's Jeremy's story. And I was confused at first because I must have expressed to her in some way that I was a little confused, because she says, I don't know if you know my whole story. And I was like, no, I guess I don't, because I'm not quite sure what she's referring to. And so she asked if we can talk on the phone, because she was really apprehensive about coming on the podcast, because she didn't know. I think she was scared. She was nervous. She didn't know how it was going to land. She didn't know what, any of that. So I was like, yeah, sure. So we talked on the phone, and it was then where she kind of shared her story, and she says, yes, my oldest son, Robert, died on April 4th, 2004. But I really want to tell the story of my youngest son, Jeremy, who was a Marine and committed suicide a couple of years ago. And I was just completely like, I was like, I'm way out of my element to have that conversation.
Right. I mean, I can imagine it's almost like, oh my God, what did I just do?
Yes,
this is
right.
This is too big for me. Like, what did I, I've created Frankenstein's monster or something that's like, this is taken a turn, a very important turn, as it turned out. But this was not, when you go back thinking that you were just going to do sort of a Talking Dead, recap of the episodes, you were miles away from where you originally thought you were going to start.
Oh yeah, I mean, I felt like
it was huge.
I felt like I opened up the hood of a Ferrari, standing there with a pipe wrench in my hand. Right? That's. I was just like, oh my God. I was like, I immediately reached out to you, and I was like, bro, I'm a little out of my wheelhouse here. I'm not entirely sure, how to even do this. I knew I needed to, and really that conversation that I had with her was really nothing more than, and her biggest thing was the going back to the moral injury piece. Everyone is aware that she got two sons that died. They both died on a battlefield. It's just one was in combat and one was a struggle with whatever he was dealing with, depression and whatever else. And I told her, I said, Jeremy is as much a hero as Robert. And what she was struggling with, though, was her own internal feelings of, she felt it easy to honor her son Robert, who died on April 4th in combat, but found it difficult to honor her son that committed suicide. But to her, they're both her sons. They both served this country. The method of death was just different, and that she had a lot of shame associated with this, and both from the family background and their religious beliefs, and there's a lot of other things there that she had a lot of internal struggle with. But she finally at some point decided that she wanted to honor both her sons equally, and wanted this coming on the show and sharing her story as a way to step in that direction. And I wanted to give her the platform to be able to do that. And suicide's a big deal amongst the veteran community. And what she really wanted to talk about was the impact and the effects that veteran suicide has on everyone else left behind. A lot of people that commit suicide, they do so in the attempt to stop the pain, but in fact the pain doesn't stop. It just gets dispersed and disseminated across the family and loved ones and friends of those left behind. And that's really what she wanted to share in that episode.
And I think that's even that being, the episode, maybe that was probably the one episode that you didn't even anticipate and you couldn't even see, at the beginning. If you had considered all of the potential episodes, that was probably one that you hadn't even thought of. But it became one of the most important, and it all is about awareness. It's bringing awareness to veterans to say, hey, you can talk about these things. The world's not going to come crashing down, but also using this series as an awareness of being able to talk about these things and how they impact. I mean, 444, and I think the 8-episode series itself was really 36, maybe 48 hours, right?
Yeah.
That was the time frame. I know that I think you and I have talked, and it was a really well done series, and I could see it being a little bit like Band of Brothers for our generation, except of course Band of Brothers took them from training to the end of the war, and this was a very, very contained 48 hours. But in those 48 hours, the impact is still being felt today, both for good and for bad. Mm-hmm. And I think your series captured that pretty well.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and it's it's just a testament to the guests that came on the show and the interaction of the folks in the group and the feedback that we've gotten so far. And one of the other things, I think, I don't even know if I shared this with you, Duane, is one of the other things that I've really struggled with for a long time is I was a part of a tragic accident that happened while I was there. Towards the end of our deployment, there was a 2-5 convoy heading north on Pluto, just went underneath the overpass, heading north. Going kind of past where the old UN building was, and there was a set of Jersey barriers that were there, and there was an LMTV. It was behind several other vehicles, and the dust kind of kicked up, and the driver really couldn't see where he was going, and ended up smashing right into the broad end of the line of Jersey barriers, and the LMTV flipped over, and someone was partially ejected out the driver's door, and then the LMTV flipped over on its side, and so the soldier was pinned basically between the door and the cab of the LMTV on the ground on its side. And my section was coming back from Victory North, from buyout, from dropping somebody off at the airport for R&R, and we got a follow-on mission to head north Pluto and assist with whatever needed to be done, whether it's pull security or whatever. We heard something had happened, and we were the Brigade QRF, so we were always, involved with everything that kind of went on in that sector.
Go fill that hole,
yeah,
boy.
And so we did. We moved north and kind of came on the scene there, and I'm not going to get into the whole story. It's a really impactful story, and in that soldier, we ended up finally getting him out. We lifted the cab. We got the cab lifted, and the chain kind of broke, and it landed on him again, almost as I was almost going underneath it to grab him. And so I was almost a casualty that day as well. That's probably another reason why it stands out in my mind as just one of those days that'll never leave me. And I didn't know this kid. He was semi-conscious at the time, and we got him out. Long story short, he ended up getting evacuated, and we found out not too long later that he had passed. And 13 years later, I think about him a lot. And one of the things that bothered me the most was the fact that I didn't know his name. I didn't know his name. And I got images. Sometimes a lot of my in my dreams at night, my nightmares are of that, and I wake up and it just bothers me that never knew who this kid was. And through this series of everything, talking to these guys, being in the group, it came out a couple of times. I don't know if you picked up on that. I don't remember which show it was that at first kind of...
It was, I remember the piece was with Ellis.
Yeah.
You were telling this story with Ellis in episode 10. And I don't think that Ellis was prepared to hear this story either.
No.
And the two of you, so the two of you were coming out from two different sides of this story. But go ahead.
It was my conversation with Ellis that at first I started to connect the dots that we were talking about the same thing, and Hendrickson is his name, and somebody had made a reference in the 444 group, and it was some guy named with the name Hendrickson, and he had made a comment about his son dying towards the end of our deployment due to a vehicle accident, and I was just like, and I kind of direct messaged him, and I said, you don't know me, I'm the admin of the group. You mentioned something about your son dying there towards the end of our deployment. I said, would you mind sharing with me how he died? And he says, well, the helmet TV had flipped over and he was pinned and it was crushed. And it was right then that I realized that this was that kid's father I was talking to. And he and I basically laid in bed that night and texted with him for a couple of hours. I think it was a long time, and I shared with him the story, and I shared with him what happened, and just being able to connect with him. And I didn't know that his son had a young boy at the time when he died, and he showed me, and I got on his profile picture and saw the picture of his son, and looked so much like his dad, and it was a chapter that I was able to finally close in my time that I served in Iraq, and it's something as little and as important as just knowing the name of that soldier that I tried so hard to try to extricate out of that vehicle and was unsuccessful, and he died. And I think the show that's going to be releasing today, I think I talk about that as well. It kind of comes up a couple of times because this kid Hendrickson was a well-liked, well-known kind of the life of 2-5, and everybody that knew him just has so much respect for him, and I feel bad that the only time I got to meet him was in his last moments of life, and
right.
I just wish I could have gotten to know him before, but yeah, so that came out of this series. Totally didn't see that coming.
And I think that's that closure piece, and it's never going to be fully, complete. But one of the metaphors that I use to explain, and I think that I've heard it from some other people, but the idea of these traumatic events or these challenging things in our lives, they're not lodged anywhere in time. So imagine sort of your mind is the library of your life, and on the bookshelves are all the different, the books that cover the part of your life that was high school or that was basic training or pre 9/11, and so. You can go back and you can access those memories deliberately. You can go back and think on those times. You can pull the book down, so to speak, from the shelf about your high school time, and you can specifically think about that. Or maybe when you're talking about your kids or your kids are going through high school, you bring a memory back and you do that. So it's a very once I'm done with the memory, I close the book, I put it back. Well, these moments are really like pages that are floating around the library that aren't really bound in any, time or any book in our life. We're sitting here, we may be flipping through our, post-military book, coming up with another memory, and then something, another page comes and smacks us in the face. of, Iraq, or, there's times, I mean, it doesn't have to be traumatic. There's times where I'm just sitting in bed and I'm reading a book, and I think about my time in North Africa, and the book has nothing to do with the military or Africa or stadiums or whatever. And it wasn't traumatic. It's just these memories are unbounded in our mind. And if we don't process them, if we don't think about them, if we don't talk about them, they never really get bound in any particular place. And so, and for you, it's almost as if subconsciously, again, I can't finish writing this story because I don't know all the details. Now that I know all the details, I can bind this memory. I can put a period. I can end the chapter, whatever metaphor you want to say, but you can bind it in that moment in time. And then that brings a level of closure. It doesn't make you feel any better about it. It doesn't make you feel any happier, of course, that it happened. But you're able to tell yourself, now I know what I need to know to be able to put that page in the book of 444. And that provides some relief. That provides some measure of satisfaction. Again, not that it happened, but that now you know what you need to know. And it's not just the closure that you provide. It's maybe the closure that I got the sense that Ellis had never heard that part of the story. And obviously that was somebody that was very important to him. Mm-hmm. That when I heard that, and I listened to it probably 3 or 4 days ago, that I, listening as a mental health counselor, I was like, that was a huge moment for both of you, that you had a point of awareness. That almost wanted to pause and recognize and say, hey, don't pass up the importance of that moment where you had closure. And then even closure for his father, mm-hmm. closure for you, all of these. And so it's sort of like, the tumblers falling in place in a lock that's finally getting people this sense of satisfaction. And that's huge. And that never would have happened had you turned around and walked away from the bear.
Yeah. And when it finally connected with me, talking to Ellis, when it finally connected with me that the name that I've been searching for 13 years was Hendrickson. I don't know if you probably picked up on it, but those that listen to the show that may not have picked up on it, go back and listen to that. You'll see there was a moment where I was just I was completely taken back. I totally didn't see it coming, and when I finally mm-hmm. when I finally connected the dots, and I heard the name, I almost broke down. I'm sitting there trying to conduct this interview, and I'm like, emotionally, I'm just like I wanted to cry. I mean, you get that frog in your throat because I'm sad, I'm mm-hmm. heartbroken, but I'm also relief. Yeah, it's just a huge sense of relief, and I think it comes up again in the show that I'm releasing today with Rafael Rea. I mentioned Hendrickson, and he's like, you were there for that, and I was like, yeah. And we kind of talk about the story a little bit more, and 444. It was one day, long day. Let's be honest, but it was really just the start of an entire year that would be filled with more loss, more bloodshed. Thank God, more bad guys killed, and we all kind of went through our own hell. And going back to even Lorenzo Nathan's episode 3, one of the things that he shares, he got wounded pretty early on in our deployment, ended up getting evacuated and never came back. And that was one of the things that he struggled with, is this feelings of guilt that he was taken out of the fight and couldn't go back to the battle with his brothers. He kind of felt like he abandoned us, and it's that's so far the furthest from the truth. He didn't abandon us. I mean, he did everything he could. He got wounded, but that doesn't help how you feel, right? Because you've got your cognitive reality mind, and then you've got your feelings, and oftentimes they're not congruent, and it's difficult, I think, to make peace with that at times.
It is, and that's the piece where the stories we tell ourselves, which aren't actually true, are the ones that we emotionally react to. And so for Nathan, me abandoning my brothers, that's something that I was taught not to do, and through no fault of my own, I can't, that's what happened. But that's the story I tell myself. And if I keep that story to myself and I don't reveal it to anyone else, then that's the one that I'm going to believe. That becomes my reality, and then my emotions are going to be tied to that. The stories that you have brought out with your guests and even with you have given you the other side of the story, and that you can choose to believe in a different reality than what you've been telling yourself. It's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, man. So I'm really glad that I did this series, and I'm really glad that you were instrumental in kind of helping me unpack a lot of these topics and a lot of my own internal feelings about it, and continue to be there to kind of help me see a lot of this stuff, whether it's directly through conversations or indirectly. I learn a lot from listening to your shows and the guests you have, and it helps me understand kind of the mental piece and what's going on behind the scenes in my brain and in my psyche. So thanks for what you do, man, and I appreciate it, and allows people like myself and the guests and the listeners to kind of help make sense of this shit, because they do a really good job in basic training to teach us how to work as a cohesive team, and how to fire a weapon, and how to do our military specialty, whatever that is, and to go into combat and all of that, right? But they don't really teach you how to deal with the feelings of loss and failure and all these emotions that go into it, and the world, the army, that song, right? The army goes rolling along. Man, that's
Mm-hmm.
no shit, right? It continues to go on without us.
Yeah.
And
you know what? And so I retired August 1st, 2014, and I drove on to Fort Carson that morning. It's the first time in 22 years that I wasn't a soldier. And they had the audacity to continue to hold formation, right? Like, what the flag went up, the flag went down. I'm like, are you kidding me? No, you're right.
Yeah.
That is exactly it. The Army, the military does continue. And that's one thing. And again, if there's a gong that I am continuing to bash, it's that we don't do a very good job preparing us psychologically to A, deal with the things that we did, or B, even to be aware of how important the mental health aspect is to our post-military lives. The thing that I like what you've done here is that you're starting to get guys talking about this. We're only talking 12 to 13 years afterwards. We're not talking about 3 decades like we know that veterans in the past have. That we're finally putting these things in their place so we can move forward and have a successful life, a peaceful life. And so we have the ability to come to terms with these things. Yes, they were tragic. Yes, they were horrible. Yes, they impact us. And yet we can stand on that trauma and be stronger for it, not let it draw us down. So I really commend you for not avoiding this, because any one of these episodes I think would have been beneficial. But all of them together collectively, I think you showed some really good stuff here, guys. Good job.
well, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
So what's next? What do you got going on?
Well, so we've got a couple more episodes on the 444 series that we'll release, and I'm going to keep the group open, and I'm going to keep the invitation open to anyone that served during that time and/or their family members. And if you want to come on and you want to talk, and I'll continue to release episodes as part of this 444 series as I get interest and as I get guests that want to come on. I suspect that we'll probably have an uptick in new releases as the anniversary of 444 comes around every year. And I suspect, just like Band of Brothers and Pacific, that the Long Road Home series will probably be a regular staple on the channel, year after year. I don't see this being a series that releases once and you'll never see it again. I don't know if it'll eventually make it over to Netflix or some other channel like that, but I do expect that this is going to continue, and I hope it does, and whatever comes of it and whatever conversations end up coming out of it, I'm willing to face that bear and continue to stand, because now I'm standing in the woods facing that bear, but I'm not alone. I'm standing with Stephen Ellis and Joey Luthman, who was an actor that learned a greater appreciation for the military. I'm standing with Bill Young and James Vanny and Sylvia, of course, and Jack Barron and Justin Hardy and Nathan Badia, Zuniga, and of course Fondren. I've got this squad and this platoon now that's standing in this forest, facing this bear with me, and we're just standing there together as a team, in formation. And the more people we bring on, the bigger that formation becomes, and the more formidable we are to that bear. And we will not be eaten alive. We refuse to, because these feelings that we all have, they're like a heavy stone. It's a heavy brick, and we can either choose to stack those bricks up and use them as leverage to gain height, to increase our perspective, or we can lay on the ground in the prone position and stack these bricks on top of us, and they begin to suffocate and kill us. Those stones will exist. It all depends on what we choose to do with them.
Mm-hmm. And the stones don't get lighter; we just get stronger. I mean, that's the thing, is we can build up the strength to carry these stones and to manage these stones, and they're always going to be there, sure. And we're not going to totally get rid of them, but we can definitely get stronger, and that's what post-traumatic growth is about, as opposed to being buried, like you said, by our experiences. So one last question, Eddie. Who do you want to see? Who is like the big, hairy, audacious goal? What guest do you want to get on one of the future episodes that would just be, amazing?
I would love to interview Martha Raddatz, because she's the one that kind of started this whole thing. I think that would be amazing to get her on the show. And she's done a lot of interviews, so I don't know if there's anything that I could get out of her that she hasn't already shared, but just having a chance to talk to her and thank her for what she's put together, both in the book and in the work that she's done in the series, and connecting, really making it's not somebody that just went and wrote a book, became a bestseller, okay, on to the. I mean, she built relationships with these guys over the years, got to know them personally, and followed them and stayed connected with them, and really became invested in their lives. And you don't do that unless you really care, and she really cares, and it shows. And I don't know if it wasn't for her book and it wasn't for this series, this series obviously would not have existed. I would not have ever had the opportunity to probably talk to any of these folks. I wouldn't have probably heard Sylvia's story. I definitely wouldn't have. I would have probably gone to my grave never knowing Hendrickson. So for that, I think that would probably be the one guest I would really love to have on the show to kind of, put a cap on all of it.
Well, there you go. So Martha, if you're listening, there it is. That's what, and I'd love to hear that story too. I'd love to hear that conversation, and really to be able to, how many people have gone up to Martha and said, what you've done is impactful. And many people can do it on a grand stage. Of course, we can do it on a very small stage when our kids come back and say thank you or whatever it is. But I think that would be a great show. All right, man. Well, thanks for taking this journey with me, and thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, man. Thank you for being a part of it, coming on the show, and appreciate everything that you do and continue to do, and look forward to doing more of these in the future.
Absolutely. Hang in there. And what is it? Shoot him in the face?
Shoot him in the face.
Shoot him in the face.
That's right, man.